We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis Meseches Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 54b. The Gemara says, Onesh Shamana, we see a punishment when it comes to a man being with another man. As Hara Minayin, but where do we find the warning? And the Gemara says, Talmud Lomer, because the pasuk says, V'yes Zochar lo sishkav mishkavei isha to'evahi. And so from that pasuk again, it says it can't be with another man. That is the warning. And the Gemara says, Lamadnu azhar l'shochev. So from this pasuk, that's talking about the shochev. That's the one who's actively with the other man. But azhar l'nishkav minayin. From where do we know a warning for the person who's the nishkav? That's the one who's with the other man passively. Talmud Lomer. So for that, the pasuk says, Lo yeh kadesh mibnei Yisrael. You can't be a kadesh from bnei Yisrael. And the idea of kadesh is a form of zanus. V'yomer, it also says, V'gam kadesh haya ba'aretz asu kechol hatoevos hagoyim asher horish v'gomer, uses the word kadesh, and it's clear from that pasuk, from the context, that we're talking about toevos, we're talking about abominations. Again, it's an idea of znus. Mishkav zocher is considered to be a toeva, it's considered to be an abomination, and therefore from this pasuk of lo yeh kadesh, we learn nishkav as well. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, this is the opinion, these are the words of Rabbi Yishmael. And the Brisa continues, Rabbi Kiva says, Eino tzarech, you don't need this pasuk of lo yeh kadesh for a warning for nishkav, because harehu omer, because the pasuk says, Ves zachar lo sishkav mishkavei isha, and so if it says lo sishkav mishkavei isha, but we can also read that in a different fashion, kari be lo sashkiv, we can also read it as lo sashkiv, to cause someone to lie with this person. That's essentially a reference to the nishkav, to the one who is passive. Again, that pasuk will end up referring to both the shochev and the nishkav in terms of how you can read that pasuk in two ways. And we will take a look at both the Mesoras Hashas and the Bach over here. The Mesoras Hashas notes Bekrisas Gimel Amud Aleph Isa Karibe Lo Sashchiv. That's the way we just read the Gemara right now. Lo Sashchiv again would be a way of referring to the nishkav, to the one who is passive. The way the Bach has it is Verashi Lo Sishkav Mishkavei Isha Karibe Lo Sishachev. Again, the same idea. That's referring to the nishkav. And the Gemara continues, Behema minol, and where do we find the source for the prohibition of being with an animal? Tetan Rabbanan, because the rabbis taught, Ish, it says in the pasuk, a man, prat lekatan, that excludes a katan, again to exclude a minor. And the pasuk goes on to say, Asher yiten shechavto bevehema, it says he's with an animal, bein gedola bein katana, with regards to the animal, it doesn't matter if it's an adult or a minor. Mos yumas, and then it says in that pasuk, the punishment is going to be mos yumas, will surely be put to death. And we understand that to mean beskila. Again, that means to say the punishment of skila, of stoning. Atomer beskila, weinu ela ba'achas, mikol misas v'amuris b'torah. You're saying it's stoning. Maybe it's one of the other death penalties. Nemar kan ta'arogu. It says in this pasuk ta'arogu. Again, in this pasuk it says v'isha shar yitein shechavto b'vehema mos yumas v'yas ha'behema ta'arogu. It uses the word ta'arogu. V'nemar lahalan, and it says further on ki harog ta'argenu. It uses a similar language. And malahalan beskila, just like over there by harog ta'argenu, there it's talking about a mesis by someone who incites others to do avodah zarah. It's talking about a punishment of skila, of stoning. Afkan beskila. So too over here, we're talking about the punishment of skila. We're talking about the punishment of stoning for being with an animal. And the Gemara continues. The Brisa continues. Lamanu onesh l'shochev. So we have a punishment for the one who is with the animal in the active fashion. But onesh l'nishkav minolan. From where do we know a punishment for somebody who is passive with an animal? Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, "Kol shochev and behema mos yumas." It says anybody who lies with an animal will surely die. Now we don't need that for shochev. We already had a pasuk for shochev for the one who's active. So teneu inyan lenishkav. So instead you can apply that pasuk for nishkav for the one who is passive. Lamadnu onesh bein l'shochev bein lenishkav. Now all of these psukim are talking about punishments, so we understand a punishment for one who is shochev or nishkav with a behema, whether active or passive. Azhara minayin. Where do we know the warning? Talmud Lomer v'chol behema lo sita and shechavtecha l'tamaba. It says it can't be together with any animal. Lamadnu azhara l'shochev. This pasuk teaches us a warning for the shochev, for the one who's active, and lenishkav minayin. Where do we know a warning for the one who is passive? Talmud Lomer lo yeh kadesh mibnei Yisrael. Again, the same pasuk of lo yeh kadesh. It's like an abomination. V'yomer v'gam kadesh haya ba'aretz. And again, it says that other pasuk that refers to it as a toev, an abomination. And so that includes nishkav when it comes to a behema. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Again, these are the words of Rabbi Yishmael. Again, Rabbi Kiva argues. Rabbi Kiva says, "Eino tzarech." You don't need this pasuk of lo yeh kadesh because harehu omer, because the pasuk says lo sitein shechavtecha, and we can understand that to mean lo sitein shechivascha. Again, that that this is talking about the passive individual, you can read that pasuk in two ways, and so therefore you have a warning when it comes to nishkav, to the one who's passive as well. And the Gemara continues, Haba al hazocher. Now, if somebody has relations with a male, and we're talking about a man with a man, and now we're talking about the person who is haba al hazocher, the person who is active, vehevi al zocher. But then let's say also he brings a male upon him, he's passive. Let's say he does both of those, and we're talking about in one situation of shogeg. The question is, do you bring one carbon or two carbonos? And so it comes out that in this situation of baal hazocher and hevi al zocher, we had a machlokus between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. What is the source for nishkav by zocher? Is it a separate pasuk of kadesh, or is it really just the same pasuk read in different fashions? And so it's going to make a difference. Amar Rabbi Avo says l'divrei Rabbi Yishmael, according to Rabbi Yishmael, that it's a separate pasuk by nishkav of kadesh, so chayev shtayim. So actually that's considered two separate negative commandments, and therefore the person would be chayev two. He has to bring two karbanos. Chada milo sishkav, chada milo yeh kadesh. Again, there's one pasuk that says lo sishkav, one pasuk that says lo yeh kadesh. That's two separate pasukim, and therefore it's two violations. But l'divrei Rabbi Akiva, but according to Rabbi Akiva, Eino chayiv ela achas, and you're only going to be chayiv one, because lo sishkav lo sishachev chadahi. The fact that you're taking one pasuk and reading it in different fashions to apply to both of the active person and the passive, but fundamentally it's all one pasuk, and therefore it's just going to be one carbon. And the Gemara continues along the same lines. Haba'ala behema. Let's say somebody is active with an animal, vehevi behema olav, and he has relations with the animal in a passive fashion. It's going to be exactly the same. Amar Rabbi Avo says, L'divrei Rabbi Yishmael chayev shtayim. According to Rabbi Yishmael, there's two violations. Chada milo sitein shechavtecha v'chada milo yeh kadesh. One from the pasuk of lo sitein shechavtecha and one from lo yeh kadesh. And L'divrei Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Akiva, eno chayev elachas. It's just going to be one, because again, shechavtecha u'shchivascha chadahi. It's all the same pasuk. It's just being read in two ways. Shechavtecha shchivascha. It's all considered one, and therefore there's just going to be one carbon brought in that situation. But the Gemara continues, Abaya says, Afilu l'divrei Rabbi Yishmael nami, even according to Rabbi Yishmael, who learns from Kadesh, eino chayiv elachas. When it comes to an animal, it's still going to be just one violation. It's going to be one carbon, because Abaya says, Dechi ksiv lo yeh kadesh, because actually, when it says lo yeh kadesh, begavre ksiv, it's talking about by a man with another man. We do not apply that pasuk by an animal, even according to Rabbi Yishmael, and therefore by an animal, this is not going to be the source for nishkav by an animal. But the Gemara says, if that's true, Elul Rabbi Yishmael, but then according to Rabbi Yishmael, Azhara l'nishkav minole. So where is the warning for the case of nishkav by an animal? And the Gemara brings another pasuk, nafkale. He learns from the following pasuk, Mikol shochev in behema mos yumas. It says, anyone who lies with an animal will surely die. Imeino inyan l'shochev. Now that we don't need that for shochev, we already have a pasuk for that. So teneyu inyan l'nishkav, so we'll apply it to a nishkav. V'afke rachmanan l'nishkav b'loshan shochev. And the reason why the Torah talks about a nishkav in the language of shochev is to say ma'shochev onash v'hizr. Just like by shochev there's a punishment and a warning, af nishkav, so too by nishkav onash v'hizr there's going to be a punishment and a warning. And Rashi explains, Abaya dechiksiv lo yeh kadesh, because when it says lo yeh kadesh, again, according to Rabbi Yishmael, biznus de gavriksiv, it's talking about a man with a man, that kind of znus. Aval behema ein znus. By behema we don't say it's a znus. Kedi alfina b'yavamas mi esnan zona mechir kelev v'lo shayich bo loshen kedeshus. There's not a language of kedeshus that is used when it comes to animals. V'hai detanya tana le'el lo yeh kadesh. Now, when the Brisa said before, explicitly it said that lo yeh kadesh is for nishka by behema. L'rav chadamil. So there, the Brisa was just saying something, essentially exaggerating, so to speak. That wasn't the real source. Aval ikar azhara lav mehasam. The main warning is really not coming from there. The question is, where is the warning from? As the Gemara said, Elaminolan, where does it come from? Nafkalei mikol shochev da'apikte la'onesh l'nishkav b'loshan shochev. We're taking the punishment of nishkav in the language of shochev, le'elfei mishochev la'azhara, to learn from shochev this warning. So it's all coming from shochev. Hilkach azhara l'shochev v'nishkav milav de lo sitin shechavtecha. Therefore, the azhara, that warning, is really coming by shochev and nishkav, all from the same pasuk of lo sitein shechavtecha. Chad b'mashmeusei. One is just what the pasuk means. V'chad midi iskish l'chavrin. One is from the comparison one to the other. V'kevan dechad lav l'tarvayu. And if it's all one lav, all one azhara, ein chiluk chatos beineim. So when it comes to carbon chatos, it's not going to be two carbon chatoses, it's going to be one. And the Gemara continues, hanir ba lazocher v'hanir ba lebehema. Let's say a person is passive with another man, and he's also passive with an animal. So how many violations is that? that. So here it's actually going to be, it's going to reverse. Amar Rabbi Avo says, L'divrei Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Akiva, this is two separate negative commandments. So chayev shtayim, therefore he's going to be liable to karbanos, chada milo sishka, v'chada milo sita and shechavtecha. One comes from lo sishka, one from lo sita and shechavtecha, one for another man, one for an animal. But l'divrei Rabbi Yishmael, but in this case, according to Rabbi Yishmael, eino chayev elachas, it's actually only going to be one, because idi v'idi lo yeh kadesh, because they both come from the exact same pasuk of lo yeh kadesh. And again, of course, Abaya argues with that, because he says lo yeh kadesh is not used for nishkav by an animal. So Abaya Omer, so therefore Abaya says, afilu l'divrei Rabbi Yishmael, even according to Rabbi Yishmael Nami, also according to Rabbi Yishmael, chayev shtayim, it's going to be two violations. T'chsiv kol shochev in behema mos yumas, as we said, the pasuk says kol shochev in behema mos yumas, and that's a comparison, shochev to nishkav, imeinu inyan l'shochev, teneu inyan l'nishkav. If it doesn't apply to shochev, use that pasuk and apply it to nishkav, to the one who's passive. V'yavgir rachmana l'nishkav v'lashon shochev, and the reason why we have the nishkav in the language of shochev in this pasuk is to say ma shochev anash v'hizr, just like by a shochev, there's not only a punishment but a warning as well. Af nishkav anash v'hizr, so too by nishkav, there's not only a punishment but a warning as well. And again, according to Rabbi Yishmael, that would mean that the warning by a nishkav, by someone who's passive when it comes to an animal, is a separate warning from the warning by a nishkav, by somebody who's passive when it comes to another man. But the Gemara continues, Haval habal hazocher vehevi zocher olav. Habal habehema vehevi behema olav. If a person is active with another man and passive with another man, and he's also active with an animal and passive with an animal, so then Beinli Rabbi Avo, Beinli Abaya, it doesn't matter if you're following Rabbi Avo or Abaya, Rabbi Yishmael chayev shalosh. According to Rabbi Yishmael, the person will be chayev shalosh. He'll have to bring three karbonos, because again, whether we're going like Rabbi Avo or Abaya, two of those violations are going to be merged into one. Either we're going to say that all the animal violations are merged into one, or we're going to say all of the passive violations are merged into one. And Rabbi Akiva chayev shtayim, according to Rabbi Akiva, again, it's always going to be chayev shtayim, because we're going to say the active and the passive is all going to be considered one violation. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Zocher, when it comes to a man with a man, Lo asu bo katan kegadol. We don't consider a minor like an adult. We'll explain this in a moment. But behema, when it comes to an animal, asu bo ketana kegadola. We treat a minor, we treat a young animal just like an older animal. And the Gemara says, Mai lo asu bo katan kegadol. What does it mean by an adult? We don't consider a minor like an adult. Amar Rav says, Lo asu bias pachos mi ben teisha shanim. What it means is, if a person has relations with somebody less than 9 years old, that's not the same as keben teisha shanim. That's not the same as if the person is 9 years old. The point over here is that by a 9-year-old, that act of relations is considered an act of relations, but younger than that is not considered an act of relations. But Shmuel says it's not talking about 9 years old, rather it's 3 years old. Lo asu bias pachos mi ben shalosh shanim. It means an act of relations with a boy younger than 3 years old is not keben shalosh shanim, is not the same as 3 years old. Already under 3 years old is not considered to be an act of relations at all. And the Gemara continues and explains, what exactly are Rav and Shmuel arguing about? Rav holds, called the Isei b'shochev, Isei b'nishkav. Anybody who's able to have an active kind of relations, so he's also able to be considered passive, and so therefore you have to be 9 years old to be considered a shochev, and therefore by nishkav as well you have to be at least 9 years old. V'chol the lesei b'shochev, if you're not able to be considered to having active relations, meaning not 9 years old, lesei b'nishkav, so passively also is not considered an act of relations. That's what Rav holds. Shmuel, but Shmuel says no, mishkavei isha ksiv. It says that the person is lying with another male, mishkavei isha, the way they lie with a woman. By a woman, certainly the act of relations is from 3 years old, and so therefore that is the age. If the boy is under 3 years old, it's not considered nishkav in that situation. And the Gemara continues, Tanya kavase de Rav, we have a brisa that supports Rav, Zocher ben teisha shanim v'yomechad, if you have a male and he's 9 years old and 1 day, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph.